Money isn't just paper or numbers on a screen, it's a collective story that everyone believes in. As long as that belief holds, the system functions. Once it's lost, no machine can save the economy. This is one of the simplest yet most chilling lines from Can We Just Print More Money? A book by two economists from the Bank of England, Rupaton and Jack Mining. It aims to explain the most complex economic concepts using everyday language, without equations or charts. It only poses questions that anyone who has ever held money has pondered. Why does breakfast appear on our tables exactly when we need it? Why do prices rise without anyone commanding them to? Why can't we just print more money to become richer? The book acts like a map, unveiling the invisible structure of the world where people's small choices intertwine to run the global economy. It tells tales of breakfast, climate, wages, invisible money, and the crises that have shaken humanity's trust. Each page speaks not just about economics, but about how humans live together, hope, and cooperate. Upon reading, one easily grasps a paradox. The economy functions not through control, but through trust. A farmer in Kenya, a worker in Vietnam, an investor in New York are bound by the same invisible thread. If that trust breaks, the numbers on the screen instantly turn to dust. And that's what makes this book special. It doesn't try to explain how to make money. It forces readers to confront a deeper question. What are we truly believing in when we believe in money? If money only lives within human belief, what happens when that belief wavers in a world that can generate billions of dollars with just a few lines of code? Where does true value lie then? Perhaps the terrifying truth isn't that we can't print more money, but that people no longer know how to print more trust. The morning begins with the aroma of coffee and the clatter of a bread knife. A simple act, yet if you look closely, you'll realize the whole world is in that sandwich. Wheat grains sown in distant fields are transported by containers, passing through the hands of laborers, machines, and vendors. All are connected in an invisible network. No one directs them. No sheet music is written, yet every rhythm aligns perfectly. This is how the market operates. As millions of individual decisions create a collective order, the breakfast buyer is also a link in that system. When choosing between a pastry and a cup of tea, they are making an economic decision. Each choice is an unconscious calculation involving budget limits, preferences, time, and opportunity costs. By choosing this pastry, they forego the opportunity to choose something else. By saving a few coins, they are trading present pleasure for future benefit. Economics isn't about cold numbers, it's about how humans negotiate with their desires. In a candy store, a place cherished by millions in their childhood, the freedom of choice reigns supreme. People get to pick their own candies, weighing sweetness against their wallet's limit. Everyone has boundaries, and within those boundaries, people learn to maximize their joy. This is primal economic instinct, seeking the greatest satisfaction within the smallest means. When prices change, human behavior shifts accordingly. Economists call this the law of supply and demand. But behind those words lies a rule of instinct. When something is cheaper, people want more. When it's more expensive, they pull back. This happens in bars, supermarkets, markets, wherever people exchange. A discounted beer draws crowds, not because they're thirstier, but because the price creates a feeling of permission. Sometimes, prices don't dictate behavior. A life-saving medicine might increase tenfold in price, yet patients still must buy it because need follows survival, not reason. Conversely, some things become more coveted the more expensive they are, not for their true value, but for their prestige. These are the human paradoxes the market embraces, where prices reflect not just material goods, but also pride, fear, and aspiration. When all individual desires meet, the world forms a giant picture. Farmers, workers, merchants, customers, everyone pursues their own self-interest, but the result is order. Adam Smith once called this the invisible hand. Each person, acting for themselves, unwittingly serves others. A baker doesn't need to know who you are, yet still wakes early to bake bread because he also needs to live. When each individual seeks personal happiness, the entire society moves forward. However, this order is not perfect. Sometimes, rational individual choices lead to irrational collective outcomes. In the canteen of a large building, a tray of fries is always full. Everyone wants to take a little more because the price remains the same whether you eat a lot or a little. Eventually, most fries are left behind, and those who come later find nothing. No one intentionally causes waste, but the result is exactly that waste. This seemingly small story is the tragedy of the commons writ large across the world. It repeats with resources like air and oceans. Each nation, each individual has valid reasons to consume more, to develop further, to earn more profit, but collectively, this leads to degradation, global warming, and the depletion of vital resources. Everyone is individually right, but collectively wrong. Economics calls this market failure, when individual interests no longer align with community interests. Some believe we can correct this by taxing carbon, limiting emissions, or trading pollution rights. These are efforts to create the true cost of actions so that each decision considers not just profit, but also consequences. But these solutions open up bigger questions. Are humans truly willing to pay the price for this planet when immediate gains are always more visible than distant collapse? In this negotiation, economics is both a witness and the accused. It helps us understand the rules governing behavior, but is also blamed for reducing everything, even life itself, to numbers. A world that only measures by price will forget what is priceless. Amidst the swirling currents of market and environment, people still have to live, work, and earn wages. Each month, looking at the number printed on their payslip, the question arises, why am I not getting a raise? This seemingly personal question encapsulates an entire economy behind it. The value of labor is not just created by you, but determined by the entire market. When many people want the same job as you, your value decreases. When your skills are rare, your value increases. Every wage is the result of a silent battle between human supply and demand. Employers want to reduce costs, workers want to increase income, and the market is the impartial referee. But there are times when this referee is blind. When automation takes over, millions are replaced. When globalization expands, jobs shift to cheaper locations. When unions weaken, the voice of workers diminishes. Economics can explain the asterisk why, but struggles to answer the asterisk sadness. A person can work hard and still not earn enough to live, not because they are incompetent, but because the system has changed. Yet within these fluctuations, an unchanging principle exists. True value cannot be hidden forever. Productivity, creativity, and knowledge remain the only resources that help people rise in the endless game of economics. Understanding economics is not to lament, but to comprehend one's place in the bigger picture, to know when to strive and when to adapt. Breakfast, climate change, payroll, three seemingly disparate things connected by a single thread: human decisions. Economics isn't separate from life, it is asterisk life. And if you look deeply enough, you'll see that every movement of money, goods, and jobs is merely a manifestation of one thing: how we choose to live in a world with finite limits but infinite dreams. Some days the sky turns gray, like a weary earth reflecting itself. People still drive to work, turn on the air conditioning, produce, and consume. But somewhere a coral reef vanishes, a forest is scorched, a river turns into a muddy stream. Every action has its own logic, but when combined, the world loses its balance. This isn't a story about strangers, but a mirror reflecting humanity in its own era. An economist once said, "The free market is a magnificent invention because it knows how to organize millions of people without anyone commanding them. But this very mechanism can lead to chaos when each person only cares about their own interests." A tray of fries in a bank canteen proved this. The price remained the same whether you took a little or a lot. Everyone naturally thought they had the right to take a little more, and that little more multiplied into a lot. Eventually, the entire tray was empty, leaving only crumbs for those who came later. No one was malicious, but the system itself created poor behavior from that tray of fries. Now, cast your gaze out to the sea and see thousands of fishing boats swarming. Each boat needs fish to survive, but if all fish together, the sea will be depleted. From cultivated land to the surrounding atmosphere, we live amidst shared resources where no one bears ultimate responsibility, and no one has the ultimate authority to stop. This is what economics calls the tragedy of the commons, where individual interests directly conflict with the interests of the whole. When the earth warms, when ice melts, when storms rage more fiercely, the question isn't why, but why don't we stop? The answer is painfully ironic. Economically, destruction is always easier than preservation. Burning coal is cheaper than clean energy. Cutting trees is more profitable than planting forests. And in profit calculations, environmental costs are rarely accounted for. Humans have grown accustomed to pricing everything, but they forget that some things, once lost, cannot be compensated by any number. Economics, looking at this tragedy, doesn't stand idly by. It seeks to correct its own flaws. One solution is to tax harm, like carbon taxes, forcing businesses to pay for their emissions. Another approach is to create a market for pollution itself by selling and buying emission rights, turning air into a commodity that forces people to consider its cost. It sounds paradoxical, but this is how the system attempts to rein itself in. Still, the question remains, can we save the planet with the very tools that once harmed it? If humans only act when they see profit, then even saving the Earth must be profitable. But if everything is priced, what will preserve the sacred, unsellable part? Economics can explain human behavior, but it may not be enough to save the human soul. And then, amidst questions of climate and markets, another negotiation unfolds in every office, every factory, every coffee shop, the negotiation between labor and wages. Everyone wants a better life, wants their efforts rewarded. But the price of effort depends not just on you, but on millions of others. Your salary reflects not only the value you create, but also the world's competition. People often think wages are a result of work ethic, but economics shows they are a result of supply and demand. When many people want the same job, the value of labor decreases. When skills become scarce, the value increases. Employers and employees stand at opposite ends of a rope, pulling back and forth with unspoken calculations. And between them, the market acts as a referee cold, yet fair in its own way. However, sometimes the referee doesn't understand humans. Someone can work 12 hours a day and still not earn enough to live, while elsewhere, a few clicks can generate enormous profits. This disparity isn't just about productivity, it's about power. Technology has changed the rules of the game, globalization has opened doors to cheap labor, and unions, the last shield of workers, are thinning by the day. The world produces more than ever, but faith in fairness is dwindling. Each worker feels small in the giant machinery where human value is measured by charts and numbers. Economics can explain the mechanism, but cannot comfort an exhausted heart. And perhaps that reminds us that economics is not just the science of money, but the science of people. Yet there is hope, for in every market cycle, there is room for adaptation. When one door closes, another opens for those who understand how the world works. Knowledge, creativity, and the ability to learn are things no machine can replace. Those who can see beyond the numbers will realize that understanding economics isn't about chasing money, but about controlling it. Looking back at this entire journey from breakfast to the sky, from a tray of fries to a payslip, we see ourselves not just as participants, but as storytellers. Economics helps us understand why the world operates as it does, but it is humans who decide where the world goes. The most miraculous thing lies there, where dry rules merge with emotional choices, where every tiny decision touches a shared destiny. The world doesn't need someone to command it, because we are its very heartbeat. The money in our hands feels real, but in truth, it is more fragile than any piece of paper. It only holds value as long as people believe in it. A coin doesn't inherently possess power. A paper bill printed with a treasury's image doesn't magically make bread appear. Money is materialized belief, a commitment that someone, somewhere, will accept it in exchange for what we need. This very belief makes society function, from the smallest transaction to the largest bank. In ancient times, people bartered one person with rice trading for another with fish. But sooner or later, that system broke down because everyone wanted to exchange different things. So, money was born. Initially, it was seashells, precious metals, then coins, paper bills, and finally, numbers on a screen. Each transition was an evolution in trust. Money is not just a tool, but the greatest social agreement ever created. When people hoard money, they think they are preserving value. But if everyone were to stash their money under their pillow, the world would cease to move. Stores would close, factories would halt. Workers would be paid, but money only lives when it circulates, just as blood is only meaningful when it flows. This is why banks were born, to keep that flow from stopping. They gather depositors' money to lend to others, creating new debts. And in doing so, money is multiplied within the system. The central bank stands in the middle, like the heart of the economic body, controlling the volume of circulating blood by adjusting interest rates, which make money cheap or expensive. When the economy is weak, they inject more money, making borrowing easier. When the economy is overheating, they withdraw money, preventing prices from skyrocketing. But every intervention is a double-edged sword. If too much money is printed, the value of belief collapses. Someone once asked, why not print more money to enrich everyone? The answer lies in a history scarred by such attempts. In places where this was tried, prices rose so high that people needed entire sacks of money to buy a loaf of bread. Money lost its meaning, and trust dissolved. At that point, paper money was no longer a symbol of value but merely the relic of an illusion. Economics calls this hyperinflation, but in essence, it's the crumbling of collective trust. The modern world has grown wiser, but risks always lurk. In 2008, a small slip in the global banking system became an earthquake. Swollen debts and seemingly rock-solid banks crumbled like sand. The entire world was stunned. Why did no one see this coming? Because faith in models and safety made people forget that risk is an inseparable part of the system. When crisis struck, money didn't disappear because it was burned or stolen, but because it ceased to be trusted. Markets collapsed, investors fled, banks hesitated to lend, the economic bloodstream contracted, and the world fell into a coma. At that moment, the role of central banks became vital. They injected money, lowered interest rates, and rescued failing institutions. Many called it a miracle, but in reality, it was just a desperate attempt to reignite extinguished trust. After each crisis, people become more cautious, and then they forget again. The economy always follows the cycle of human memory: fear, recovery, greed, and oblivion. Each generation believes it has learned its lesson until history repeats itself in a new form. And each time, the question, why did no one see this coming, echoes, then fades into the next set of growth figures. Yet if we look closer, beneath these cycles lies a consistent truth. Every economy is a story about people. Money, interest rates, banks, policies, all are just the tip of the iceberg. The submerged part is trust, fear, hope, and even panic. When people are afraid, they hoard money. When they trust, they invest. When they trust too much, they create bubbles. And when bubbles burst, they become afraid again. Economics cannot remove emotions from the equation, but it can help us understand how they affect the world. Stability isn't about eliminating volatility, but about learning to live with it. Money only has value when it changes hands, and a society is only sustainable when it knows how to uphold trust in its actions. After all, we return to the simplest question: what do we do economics for? To have more money or to have a better life? The answer lies in how we view money. If we see it as an end, we will forever run in an endless loop. But if we see it as a tool, we will know when to stop. Money can build a house, but not a home. It can buy convenience, but not peace. When we understand this, we realize that economics isn't a lesson about money, but a lesson about human limitations and choices. It teaches us to recognize the connections between the smallest things: a breakfast, a spending decision, a bill, and the fate of the entire world. And at that very moment, each person truly becomes their own economist, not because they are good at calculations, but because they know how to listen to the heartbeat of life. As the world continues to turn, as markets fluctuate, as money rises and falls daily, the only constant is humanity's ability to choose. We cannot print more trust, nor can we buy back lost time. But we can understand, to choose better, to live more wisely, and to pay a more deserving price for our own future. If you could bring your great-grandparents back to the mid-21st century, they would surely be astonished by this world. A tiny button can light up an entire room, a single phone can hold an entire library, and food is readily available in supermarkets year-round. We are living in an era of greater prosperity than any generation before us. But the real question isn't how wealthy we are, but why this happened and whether this wealth is sustainable. Economic growth has changed everything. It's not just a number on a financial report, it's a measure of humanity's ability to create value over time. In the past, most people lived by agriculture, working 16 hours a day just to survive. Today, a large portion of the world's population can learn, create, and pursue things beyond basic needs. This stems from a long chain of innovations: the steam engine, electricity, the internet, and thousands of small, accumulated ideas. Each idea is a brick building humanity's edifice of prosperity. Economists call these drivers capital, labor, and technology. Capital is the tools we create, labor is the effort we expend, and technology is the intelligence that helps us do more with less. If we imagine the economy as a river, technology is the current that propels the water further and faster. Increased productivity is multiplication, not just addition. When a craftsman can produce twice as much, they not only improve their own life, but also propel society forward. However, growth is not as natural as breathing. It requires a nurturing environment, education, property rights, and faith in the future. In unstable places where ideas are stifled, growth stagnates. When people don't believe their efforts will be rewarded, they stop innovating. Prosperity is the result of social trust, not just production. But even when prosperity spreads, it doesn't distribute equally. Some reap the majority of benefits while others merely watch from the sidelines. Inequality is not the fault of growth itself, but a consequence of its speed and direction. Those who possess capital, technology, or suitable skills are elevated. Those left behind are not unsuccessful due to a lack of effort, but because the world has changed. In every step forward, some are lifted, and some are swept away. Growth also isn't eternally sustainable if it consumes the resources of the future. Every ton of steel, every kilowatt of electricity, every tree felled is a part of the world that future generations will lack. Perhaps your great-grandparents lived simply, but they left you a planet still green enough to breathe. In return, we must ask ourselves if today's prosperity is worth sacrificing tomorrow. And when speaking of prosperity, we cannot overlook how it spreads across borders. The shirt you wear, the phone you use most are not made where you live. The world has become so intertwined that every product is the result of dozens of nations collaborating. From this, international trade has become the lifeblood of the modern economy. A cotton shirt in London might start from cotton seeds in India, be spun into yarn in Bangladesh, woven in China, cut and sewn in Vietnam, and then transported thousands of miles by sea, finally appearing in a store in London. A small product, yet it carries the footprint of hundreds of people. Each stage is performed where there is a comparative advantage, that is, where it can be done more efficiently, cheaper, or faster. This seemingly simple principle has changed the world. When each nation specializes in what it does best, overall global output increases. A country may not produce everything itself, but through trade, everyone can consume more. Trade is like a wealth-multiplying machine where cooperation replaces absolute competition. However, this picture isn't entirely bright. Beneath cheap prices and abundant supply are millions of workers in sweltering factories, where wages are low, working hours are long, and rights are fragile. The prosperity of consumers at one end of the chain often relies on the sweat of producers at the other. When we buy a cheap shirt, we are also consuming a part of someone's lifetime. Globalization brings convenience, but also clarifies the cost of that convenience. What's amazing is that this system operates thanks to an invisible trust between people who don't even know each other. A business in England places an order in Bangladesh, trusting that the goods will be delivered on time. A worker accepts 10-hour days, trusting that their wages will feed their family. It's these small, interconnected trusts that form the supply chain, the economic sinews running across the planet. But such a complex system is also vulnerable. When a pandemic erupted, factories in Asia had to close, cargo ships stood idle. The whole world realized that a phone or a face mask cannot appear if just one link breaks. When political conflicts arise, energy prices soar, leading to global inflation. A localized event in a distant port can double food prices at the local market. We live in a global economy where just a small hitch can bring the entire machine to a halt. And then there are countercurrents. Some nations are starting to talk about bringing production back home, protecting domestic jobs. But that process isn't easy because the world is sewn together so tightly, like a garment that cannot be unpicked without tearing the fabric. The question is no longer whether to globalize or not, but how to make it fairer and more sustainable. That's why every product carries a hidden ethical story. Is a cheap price worth environmental destruction? Is growth truly progress if millions still live in poverty? At its deepest level, trade is a mirror reflecting the relationship between humans and the value of labor. And from those questions, we touch upon another phenomenon no less intimate: the changing value of currency over time. If a shirt is still as cheap as it used to be, but the money in our wallet buys less. What's happening? That's inflation, a silent current that causes prices to rise, purchasing power to fall, and the memory of value to erode over the years. Inflation is often measured by indices, but its true feeling lies in everyday comparisons. A Freddo chocolate bar, which once cost 10 cents, now far exceeds that number. It's not because chocolate is rarer, but because the purchasing power of money has weakened over the past few decades. The price of everything has increased, from morning coffee to train tickets to rent. Inflation doesn't strike suddenly like a storm, but infiltrates slowly like an underground current, making us realize it only when it's already at our feet. In some places, inflation is no longer an inconvenience but a disaster. In Zimbabwe in 2008, prices rose at a terrifying rate, doubling in just one day. People needed wheelbarrows full of money to buy a loaf of bread. In 1920s Germany, money became so worthless that children played with stacks of useless banknotes. When currency loses trust, society loses its spiritual foundation. Yet, paradoxically, without inflation, the economy cannot function. A little price increase is lubricant for the machine, helping borrowers repay debts more easily and encouraging businesses to expand production. A moderate level is what central banks strive to maintain, not letting the flame die out, nor letting it burn down the house. Controlling inflation is not just a monetary problem, it's the art of reading society's emotions. When people believe prices will rise, they buy more. When they are afraid, they hoard money. This collective psychology is the software of the economy, and the central bank acts as the programmer, adjusting interest rates to reassure or stimulate. But there's no eternal formula, because economics is written by human behavior, not just by equations. If we look through all the fluctuations, we'll see three layers of meaning. Growth creates wealth, trade distributes that wealth across the planet, and inflation determines how long it lasts. These three circles interweave like gears of the same machine. If one slips, the entire system shakes. And at their center is not money, but people, those who dream, calculate, and pay the price for their own choices. Time is the quietest negotiator in every economy. It determines the value of money, effort, and trust. What is cheap today may become expensive tomorrow, not because matter changes, but because people change their perception of the future. Price is how society talks to itself about time. Recall the Freddo chocolate bar, a simple symbol for the feeling that everything costs more. But hidden behind the frog's smile is a profound concept. Reduced purchasing power means that every dollar you earn is worth less. You don't instantly become poorer, but the world around you gets richer faster than you think. This is the silent effect of inflation, the price paid for the economy's movement. The world has witnessed moments when currency evaporated faster than reason. In Zimbabwe in 2008, a morning newspaper could double in price by the afternoon. People no longer counted money, they counted bags of it. In Germany in the 1920s, some used banknotes to start fires because the value of the flame was greater than that of the paper. And in the United States in the 1970s, inflation forced every family to reevaluate their lives as wages couldn't keep pace with the price of gas and food. Economic history is a chronicle of moments when people lost faith in the value they created. Yet paradoxically, without inflation, the economy would stop breathing. A little price increase makes people want to spend, encourages businesses to invest, and keeps the monetary cycle going. A world without inflation might sound ideal, but in reality, it would be a world without dynamism. Stagnant prices mean dormant expectations. The economy needs movement, and movement always generates friction. What makes inflation dangerous is not its presence, but when it spirals out of control. Once people believe prices will continue to rise, their behavior helps make that a reality. They buy before prices increase, they demand higher wages, they raise the prices of goods, and a self-reinforcing spiral begins. Central banks then become trembling hands at the steering wheel. Just one harsh turn, and the car will veer off the road. Keeping the flame burning just warm enough is a job requiring rare sensitivity and courage. Behind terms like monetary policy, base interest rates, or money supply control lies the story of human emotions. When anxious, people hoard. When enthusiastic, they borrow and spend. A central bank understands its people not just through models, but through an intuition for social psychology. Inflation is not a number, it's a map of collective mood. Furthermore, the devaluation of money doesn't just happen in supermarkets or markets. It seeps into how we view life. When everything is priced in monetary terms, people forget that some things, once lost, cannot be quantified. Devalued currency can be reprinted, but eroded trust cannot be restored by any bank. Nations that maintain stable inflation are often not just good at management, but also at upholding the promise between the state and its citizens that today's efforts will still be valuable tomorrow. This is the foundational agreement of every modern society. Each banknote is not just a medium of payment, but a silent covenant between trusting individuals. However, this agreement is more fragile than we imagine when prices escalate too quickly. The poor suffer first because most of their income goes to essential needs. They have no assets to protect themselves, no stocks or real estate to appreciate with inflation. Each time they buy food, they pay with eroded trust. Inflation, therefore, is not just an economic issue, but a matter of social justice. Nevertheless, there's a surprising fact. Humans always learn to adapt. After each period of high inflation, economies find a new balance, giving rise to stronger institutions, tighter policies, and a deeper awareness of the limits of growth. After all, inflation is a reminder that nothing can grow forever. Everything has a price, including prosperity. Looking back from our ancestors' time to now, the world has come a long way creating wealth, sharing it through trade, and then learning to preserve its value amidst the waves of inflation. These three layers of movement growth, globalization, and pricing are the three heartbeats of the modern economy. If one beat falters, the entire body falters. But what's admirable is that through centuries, humans have found ways to adjust, to continue creating, to continue trusting. Perhaps the Freddo chocolate bar will never return to 10 cents, but that's not just a regret. It's proof that time is moving. Every coin, every item, every spending decision tells humanity's long story, the story of how we learn to live with volatility, not to avoid it, but to understand and manage it. Ultimately, economics doesn't just teach us about money. It teaches us about the fragility of order, about how tiny acts of trust keep the world standing. And looking around, seeing everything continue to operate, prices rise, goods circulate, people still exchange and strive, we know that behind all the numbers, the economy remains an endless story of humans and time. If there's one thing most astonishing about the modern world, it's that most of the money we use daily isn't actually printed. It's not in central bank vaults, nor is it transported in armored trucks under the cover of night. It exists only as numbers on a screen, a product of the credit system where money is born from trust and promises. When a bank lends you money to buy a house, no money is withdrawn from any treasury. It's created the moment you sign the contract. Simply by adding a few numbers, the bank has created new money, and when you repay the loan, that amount of money disappears from the system. It's a fragile cycle of existence where money isn't material in nature, but an agreement between people. For a long time, we've been accustomed to images of gold coins, paper bills, or precious metals as symbols of value. But the truth is, money has never truly had value without someone believing in it. In ancient times, when a person traded a cow for salt, that transaction still required trust that others would need the salt and that the cow would retain its value. As society developed, we replaced salt with gold, then paper, and then electronic codes. Though the form changes, the essence remains the same. Money is institutionalized trust, protected by law and collective expectation. Today, central banks aren't the only entities creating money. Commercial banks are the true factories of modern currency flow. Every loan is a new seed of money sprouting. When you use a credit card, when a business borrows to expand production, they aren't taking money from anyone else. They are causing the system to expand. However, this power isn't limitless. Banks are constrained by borrowers' ability to repay, by government regulations, and most importantly, by public trust. If a bank lends recklessly and trust collapses, the numbers in accounts immediately become meaningless. This mechanism once led people to ask, if banks can create money out of thin air, why can't individuals do the same? The answer lies in trust. Anyone can declare a piece of paper to be money, but what gives it value is that others accept it. Economist Hyman Minsky once said, anyone can create money, the problem is getting others to accept it. This is also why in 2008, amidst the financial crisis, an anonymous entity named Satoshi Nakamoto launched Bitcoin, a currency that needs no bank, no government. Based on a technology called blockchain, Bitcoin emerged as a reaction to the breakdown of trust in traditional monetary systems. With Bitcoin, every transaction is verified by computer code, not by an authoritative body. Its quantity was fixed from the start: 21 million units, no more can be printed. It stripped the power of money creation from banks and states, offering the illusion of absolute freedom. But that freedom also contains a contradiction. If trust is the only thing that keeps money alive, then Bitcoin is only strong as long as people believe in its value. Technology can replace intermediaries, but it cannot replace trust. At its deepest level, money is not a material thing but a commitment sealed by social trust that a bill or a number can be exchanged for something else. That's why when people lose trust, money can collapse as quickly as sea foam. In every financial crisis, the first thing to collapse isn't the bank, but the trust in it. When we understand this, we realize that the economy isn't built on gold or silver, but on the memories, expectations, and responsibilities of millions of people. Money exists not because it has inherent value, but because we collectively agree to believe it does. It can be said that money is a mirror reflecting human nature, the desire for stability, the craving for control, and the fear of loss. From stones to gold coins to digital codes, we are merely retelling the same story, the story of trust. And when we understand that, we will see that the world's problem isn't about printing more money, but about how to keep that trust from dissolving. Someone once said, if you want to understand the nature of money, try stuffing all your savings under your mattress and forgetting about it. A year later, when you pull back the fabric, the money is still there, but its value has changed. Money only lives when it circulates. When it lies dormant, it begins to die. That's a paradox humans have struggled to understand for centuries. Keeping money under your pillow seems safe. It's not subject to bank risks, not affected by interest rates, and nobody controls it. But in the real world, money cannot stand still. It is the bloodstream of the economy, and banks are the heart that pumps that blood everywhere. When you deposit money into a bank, you aren't giving it asterisk to them. You are allowing the system to use it to create new value. The bank takes that money to lend to others, helping them buy homes, invest, or open businesses. Each loan generates profit, and that profit flows back into the system, a cycle of trust. Banks exist not because of the money they hold, but because of the money they keep in motion. Yet within that system lies a secret few realize. Banks don't keep all the money you deposit. They only retain a small portion called reserves, while most is used for lending. This is a fractional reserve system, a fragile yet incredibly efficient structure, as long as everyone doesn't demand their money back at the same time. The system operates smoothly, but if trust wavers and crowds rush to withdraw their money, a bank can collapse in just a few hours. It is then that people realize money doesn't truly reside in their accounts as they thought. It only exists when the entire system believes it exists. History has witnessed this trust being tested many times, such as when American banks collapsed in the 1930s. People lined up to withdraw their money, and that very scene caused the entire system to break down. The government had to establish deposit insurance mechanisms, and the central bank had to become the lender of last resort to keep the economic heart beating. Trust at that time could not be restored by promises, but by action. And to this day, the health of the economy is still measured by the pulse of trust in the financial system. But humans are a forgetful species. When things are stable for too long, we begin to think that risk has vanished. Before 2008, most economists believed the world had entered a great moderation, a period of continuous growth, low inflation, and a safe financial system. Then the bubble burst. The 2008 financial crisis is a vivid testament to how trust can become an illusion. Banks lent recklessly, people borrowed beyond their means to buy homes, and financial institutions transformed those debts into complex investment products. Everyone believed that house prices would only rise, that risks had been diversified to the point of harmlessness. But when one link broke, the entire chain collapsed. Loans went unpaid, banks lost liquidity, and trust was drained in just a few weeks. The world at that time didn't collapse due to a lack of real money, but due to a loss of consensus that money still held value. Economic models failed not because of incorrect calculations, but because they assumed people behaved rationally. In reality, people are driven by emotion greed when prices rise, fear when prices fall, and self-delusion that they have learned their lesson. Every cycle of prosperity carries the seeds of crisis, and every crisis paves the way for a new period of stability. The financial system doesn't collapse because of mathematics, it collapses because of human nature. After the crisis, the world changed. Regulations became tighter, oversight stricter, and central banks became the ultimate rhythm keepers of the economy. But at the same time, a question still resounds. If simply injecting money can save the system, why not do it forever? Why let crises happen? To let millions lose jobs? To let trust be rebuilt through pain? This question isn't just for the financial world, but for society as a whole. When we understand that money is born from trust, we also understand that the solution to every crisis doesn't lie in creating more money, but in recreating trust. And trust cannot be printed. It is built bit by bit through transparency, responsibility, and people recognizing that money only has meaning when it serves something greater than itself. The world has learned this lesson through immeasurable losses, yet deep down, humans still harbor the temptation to find shortcuts. When the economy stalls, unemployment rises, and political pressure mounts, the question returns: can we just print more money? If simply pushing a button and printing more money solved all problems, public debt vanished, the poor became rich, and the economy was energized, the world would never have operated by such simple logic. This is because money isn't wealth. It's merely a mirror reflecting true wealth. When you print more money without creating corresponding goods, services, or productivity, you are just reslicing the same old pie into more pieces, each piece smaller, and everyone feels hungrier. What gives money value is society's capacity to create something worth exchanging for it. A banknote is merely a promise that it represents effort, goods, and real value. When the government prints more money, that promise becomes cheap. Human history is filled with instances where people tried to turn printing presses into creators of prosperity and failed. In Weimar Germany after World War I, money was printed to pay war debts, resulting in bread prices rising a millionfold in just 2 years. In Zimbabwe in 2008, a $100 trillion bill wasn't enough to buy a single loaf of bread. All shared the same fate. When trust dissolves, money is just paper. The irony is that during a crisis, governments are forced to print money, not to get rich, but to save the system from collapse. When banks are paralyzed, when people aren't spending, central banks inject money into the economy through quantitative easing programs, buying bonds, and lowering interest rates. This isn't magic, but a temporary stimulant, helping the financial bloodstream flow again. But if abused, the medicine becomes poison. When the economy recovers, but money is still being pumped out, inflation erupts, and the cycle repeats. The modern world has learned that printing money isn't a physical act of machinery, but a delicate decision of trust and timing. Print too little, the system stops breathing. Print too much, the system burns out. Between these two extremes lies the art of regulation, keeping human expectations stable even as everything around constantly fluctuates. Because when people believe money will retain its value, they work, invest, and consume. But when they doubt, they retreat, hoard, and everything stops. Money is not just an economic tool, but a social commitment. Government, banks, businesses, and citizens must all adhere to that commitment. Each time one party breaks trust, when the government spends recklessly, banks speculate, or people panic, the entire system is shaken. Money has no inherent power. It is only as strong as the trust people place in it. When we ask why we can't print more money, we are actually asking if we can deceive reality with an illusion. The answer is always no. Because printing money does not conjure more resources, does not grow more fields, does not create more technology. It only changes the distribution of existing value, often in an unjust way. The rich have assets that retain value, while the poor only have cash that erodes. Printing money to help the poor can sometimes be the quickest way for them to lose everything. In recent years, as concepts like central bank digital currency or helicopter money are discussed, the debate is not about ethics but about limits. Is there ever a time when we can print more money without creating inflation? Can technology, productivity, or controlled expectations make it safe? The question remains open. But history always answers with a warning. Every economy that tried has paid the price. What is remarkable is that understanding this mechanism itself makes people freer. Knowing that money is just a tool, we stop fearing it and stop worshiping it. Money is a means to coordinate, not an end to live for. It helps us exchange, invest, and take risks, but it cannot replace trust, ethics, or creativity. When we understand this, we begin to clearly see the limits of economics. It can calculate the value of everything except the value of trust itself. Economics does not promise a perfect world. It merely shows us the rules that prevent the world from destroying itself. And the most fundamental rule is that no one can print more trust. We can create money, but we cannot force others to believe it is valuable. Trust is built through transparency, through the memory that those in power once kept their word. That is why, when central banks issue more money, what they are truly issuing is a promise that they still know what they are doing. Money, therefore, is not a story about printing, but a story about responsibility. Every unit issued is a piece of trust bestowed. When we abuse it, we lose the foundation of civilized society. And if one day people forget that true value lies in labor and creativity, not in numbers, then no matter how much money we print, we will only be printing more of our own fear. Ultimately, understanding money is also understanding ourselves, how we trust, how we panic, how we create order from chaos. Money is a mirror reflecting humanity's collective psychology. When we look at it, we see not just the economy, but the very essence of trust, the most fragile yet also the most powerful thing humans have ever created. If there's one thing this book forces us to confront, it's the realization that the world isn't governed by money, but by the trust people place in it. Every coin, every number in an account, every economic policy is just the visible tip of an invisible ocean where emotions, memories, and hopes determine true value. Money is not the goal. It is merely the language of trust. When society forgets this, we don't lose money. We lose the very foundation that enables human cooperation. The greatest lesson lies not in growth charts or laws of supply and demand, but in the question, what are we using money to serve? If it's merely to hoard, to demonstrate power, to buy a sense of security we never truly possessed, then we are becoming enslaved by something that should serve us. But if we view money as a tool, a form of energy that helps actualize ideas and enables people to work together, then it returns to its rightful place. A means, not a religion. The world may once again fall into crisis. A new financial system may emerge. The currency of the future might bear no resemblance to what we have today, but its essence will remain unchanged. Only if humans continue to trust each other will the economy breathe. Perhaps the question is no longer how much money we can print, but how much trust we can still print.